Hey guys, it's Lou. I'm back with a vinyl finds. I've got some purchases from a local record store and also some online purchases, and that includes, it's mainly vinyl records, but I've got a few CDs, some really good CDs at the end as well. Okay, starting off with an album that everybody's familiar with, Paul McCartney, Back to the Egg. I recently saw a video, I believe it was from Matthew Street, who does a lot of Beatles videos, and he was doing a Paul McCartney countdown from his least favorite albums to his most favorite, and this album actually ended up at #1, and so when I saw that, it was literally a couple of days after buying it, so it made me feel good about getting this album. I haven't fully gotten into it yet. I've only played it a couple of times, but I think it's an enjoyable Paul McCartney record. The next one, Paul McCartney and Wings. Interchangeable to me, Paul McCartney and Wings, Wings, Paul McCartney. It's all goes under my M section for McCartney. This is London Town, late 70s release. I'll play this maybe once or twice as well, and it's pretty good. It's not up amongst his best, but it's a pretty good record. Continuing the Beatles, Soul Beatles theme, I got this George Harrison, Somewhere in England. This is not one of George Harrison's best records, but it's okay. It has the song All Those Years Ago, which is a favorite of mine. This is from 1981, has a little bit of sort of that 80s keyboard sound. It doesn't usually get ranked very high amongst the George Harrison albums, but it's a decent record. Next, we have a live record from the Stranglers. This is only my second Stranglers record. This is called All Live and All of the Night, a play on the song that they cover, All Day and All of the Night, which is a cover of the Kinks song. This is from 1987. The Stranglers had introduced some horns into their live sound at this point, which sound pretty good. It still has that Stranglers energy back from the early period from the mid to late 70s. And has a lot of their hits on here, so it's a pretty enjoyable record, and I'm glad I got it. Next, we have Isaac Hayes, Joy. This is, I believe, from 1973. It's not the other record that I have of Isaac Hayes is the Shaft soundtrack. I don't think this record's as good as that record, but it's very much in a similar sounding, laid back soul groove with Isaac Hayes' deep vocals, trying to set the mood. This is worthwhile. A record that I've been looking for a while, and I had a bit of an interaction with Jorgen from Europe. I believe Jorgen's in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. Jorgen, I found this record. I know you've been looking for it as well. It's the Chicago Transit Authority, the first album. I believe this is from 1969. It's a little bit worn, got a little bit of ring wear. I didn't know that this album was a double album. I saw it for $8. I thought it was a good deal, but now that I know it's a double album, I think it's even better. It's pretty good. It's got the horns are definitely the highlight of this album, and I'm glad I got it in my collection. Someone once described this as jazz fusion. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's jazz fusion a la Mahavishnu Orchestra or Weather Report and things like that, but it certainly has a jazz element to it, and definitely the horns with the trumpet and the trombone coming in there. Really good record. I think I'm not familiar with all of Chicago's work. The only other album I have of theirs is the Greatest Hits, but I'd have to say that this probably ranks amongst their top albums. Next we have a greatest hits record from Willie Nelson. Is a double LP. I like Willie Nelson's stuff. I have some of his records. My favorite song of his, which is on here, which is the main reason I got it, is Angel Flying Too Close to the Ground. It has a lot of his hits on here, but it is missing, for some strange reason, Always on My Mind. And I think Crazy is not on here as well, which I would have loved to have seen those two songs on here. But Angel Flying Too Close to the Ground, Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, and some other Willie Nelson hits with Waylon Jennings. It's a decent record. For those of you that have seen my videos before, I've shown some Dire Straits and some of their albums. I was a big fan of Dire Straits back in the mid to late 80s. Brothers in Arms was a huge album for me, and then I started going back and listening to some of their older stuff, like their albums Making Movies. Sultans of Swing is actually my favorite song of all time, and so naturally when Dire Straits broke up after the On Every Street album, I followed Mark Knopfler's solo career and picked up all of his albums on CD, and then gradually started to get a couple of them on vinyl. One that I got most recently is his album from 2009, which is called Get Lucky. This is Mark Knopfler's, I believe it's his 7th solo album, not counting soundtracks. This album is very much like all the other Mark Knopfler solo records. They differ from the Dire Straits in that I think it still has that Mark Knopfler signature guitar sound, but I think he plays less guitar on these albums and lets his backing musicians really take go into the spotlight. One thing about his solo releases is he usually has on each solo album 2 or 3 songs with the very Celtic kind of feel, with the whistles and the fiddles and so forth, and this album's no different. It has a couple of songs with that Celtic feel, and usually those songs are some of the best songs on his albums. So this is called Get Lucky from 2009, his 7th solo release. He's made more solo albums at this point than Dire Straits records. So in preparation for getting that album on vinyl, I started to play some of Mark Knopfler's other solo releases. This is his, I think probably my favorite of his solo albums, which is his 2nd most recent album. This is from 2012. This is called Privateering. This is a true double LP, 20 songs. There's a lot of material on here. Truth be told, this could have been pared down to a single album. It would have been an unbelievable album. But as it is, it's a pretty good double album. There's some songs on here that are really some of my favorite Mark Knopfler solo songs, like Redbud Tree and Holloway. Holloway again with the aforementioned sort of Celtic feel, like I mentioned before. From 2012, Privateering. And Mark Knopfler's most recent solo album from 2015, Tracker. This is a 2 LP set, but it only has, I believe it's 12 songs or 11 songs in total. Has a song called Barrel, which is written about a writer of that Mark Knopfler admired, and that song has very much a Sultans of Swing type guitar sound. Unfortunately, the rest of the album does not have that, does not maintain that guitar sound, but it is a decent record. It's not as good as Privateering, but Mark Knopfler has a lot of fans who like his solo stuff but don't like his Dire Straits stuff. I happen to like both, but this is another strong Mark Knopfler solo record, Tracker. I saw him on this tour and he was unbelievable. Plays about 6 or 7 old Dire Straits songs and then spreads everything else throughout his solo career. 2015's Tracker. And a record that I just got in this week, I've been showing a lot of King Crimson lately, and this is one King Crimson album that I never had on CD or vinyl. This is their third album, I believe, called Lizard. This was during a period in the early 70s when King Crimson was going through a lot of their lineup changes. On this album, they have on vocals and bass Gord Haskell, and Mel Collins makes an appearance on this record. And really is one of the highlights of this is really Mel Collins' sax playing on this record. I'm still getting used to this. It has some classical elements, some jazz elements. It's moved a little bit away from the In the Court of the Crimson King type sound to a more, like I said, classical and more jazz oriented sound. John Anderson of Yes does some guest vocals on the title track on this album, which encompasses all of side 2. And continuing with King Crimson, I've also got a few CDs. I got this CD. Apologize for any glare. This is called The Great Deceiver. This is from the Wetton era, 1972-1973 recordings. And this is when the band was doing a lot of improvisational stuff in their live sets, and some of it found its way on this live album. It's a double CD. Again, has a lot of songs from Lark's Tongues and Aspic, and also a few from Starless in the Bible Black and Red, but mainly from Lark's Tongues. And it was the 4-piece Wetton, Bruford, Fripp, and David Cross on violin and keyboards. Highly recommended if you enjoy that era of King Crimson, the 1973-74 era, and if you like your live material to be very improvisation based. Another double King Crimson live album that I got is this one. This is, and I really have to apologize for the glare, I'm trying to minimize that as best I can. This is the live album from the King Crimson Collectors Club series. This is from 1996 on the Thrack tour. This is the last show of the of that tour from London. This was featuring the double trio lineup, which included 2 guitars, 2 bass, and 2 drums. You had Adrian Belew and Robert Fripp on guitar. On bass and I guess war guitar and stick, Tony Levin and Trey Gunn. War guitar, I guess, being the war guitar that Trey Gunn plays is a 10-string guitar, and it when he gets those guitars going along with Tony Levin, it sounds like 4 guitars with Belew, Fripp, Levin, and Gunn. And then you also had Pat Mastelletto on drums along with Bill Bruford. So that quartet lineup from the early 80s remained, and they added Trey Gunn and Pat Mastelletto, which made it the double trio 6-member group. This show, which was the last show on the 96 tour from London, featured a version of 21st Century Schizoid Man, which was apparently the first time that the band had played this song in London since 1973. Highly recommended to those liking their latter-day King Crimson, especially from the albums Thrack, Construction of Light, and Power to Believe. And last we have this CD called Scarcity of Miracles. This is credited to Fripp, Jaksic, and Collins. This is the most recent King Crimson related studio album. It was released again under the name Fripp, Jaksic, and Collins, and was had the subtitle of A Crimson Project. But as far as I'm concerned, this album is pretty much a King Crimson album because the five main players playing on this are actually in the current formation of King Crimson. Besides those three members that the album is credited to, it also includes Tony Levin on bass and Gavin Harrison from Porcupine Tree on drums. And all five of those members are in the current configuration of King Crimson, along with some additional drummers to make it. Their last tour they had 3 drummers, but from what I know, they're now up to 4 drummers that will be playing on the next North American tour. But this particular album, if you like your King Crimson kind of heavy, like from the Thrack period, Construction of Light, or The Power to Believe, or if you like, the King Crimson 21st Century Schizoid Man, that kind of heavier sound, you may not be a fan of this. This is very much a mellow type of King Crimson where there's a lot of sax playing. Mel Collins is the star on this record, and there's a lot of soothing, more mellowish King Crimson, kind of like the I Talk to the Wind type King Crimson sound. Okay, guys, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I invite you to make comments as usual, and we'll see you next time.